Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and today we're doing a standalone review for Ann Leckie's The Raven Tower. Now this book came out several years ago at this point, but I was always kind of tentatively interested in it, and the premise that sold me was someone out from TikTok, and they said that this was a trans man retelling of Hamlet. And for some reason that was enough to pique my interest, and so I gave this book a try. I was already kind of interested in it. Ann Leckie is a really popular sci-fi writer, and this was her first foray into fantasy, so I was kind of intrigued in that way, but that one-liner really sold it for me. So I gave this a try. Now unfortunately I did not love this book. But the reason I'm doing a standalone review for it is because if you are interested in this book, I think there are lots of really fun elements in here that you might enjoy that just don't meet my personal tastes. So that's why I'm doing a review on it. So if you're interested in this book, here's a little bit more about it and the things that are in the book that didn't work for me necessarily, but may work for you. First, I'm going to give a little bit of a plot summary, and then I'm going to talk about some world building, some writing mechanics, and some fantasy elements, and that sort of thing, and really dig into a little bit of some of the nuts and bolts of this story and how it is constructed and executed. So this is a Hamlet-inspired world, sort of, so if you're familiar with Shakespeare's play, this might be intriguing to you. This is about our main character Iolo, who is a trans man, and he is the aide to a man named Mawat. Mawat in this world is basically the Hamlet character, and Mawat is a general, and he comes back from his travels, his fighting, and his uncle has taken over the throne. Now in this world, the throne is not only politically significant, it is also religiously significant, because the person who holds the throne is called the Raven's Lease, and the Raven's Lease has the magical ability and the authority to get into contact with the Raven God and read prophecies from the Raven, and also get favors from the Raven and be the one to communicate with their god. There's also a part of this like god-human relationship where the ruler or the lease has to eventually sacrifice their life to the god when the time is right. Now, the right time is sort of a nebulous concept in this world. However, Mawat has been basically training his whole life to take the mantle of lease and king and sacrifice himself. So it's kind of a big deal that his uncle has come in and usurped him. But our main character is still Iolo. So first, I'm actually going to talk about the writing of this book, because obviously the writing is the first thing that you notice when you pick this up. This is written in both second and first person. There are two perspectives here. So we have a narrator who is speaking to you, and you are Iolo. And we also have that narrator is a character and refers to themselves as I as well. So the narrator of the story is a very important figure, and we find out in chapter 2, I believe, that this narrator is another god. Not the Raven God, but a different god. So it's kind of this omniscient being who can see everything and sees Iolo and what he is up to all the time. I actually enjoyed this narration style. I kind of like second person when it is used for a really interesting purpose. Like, for example, the 5th season is written partially in second person. While not as epic in scope, the use of the second person in this story is really cool, because we do have that god, that omniscient god character seeing Iolo as well as participating in the story itself. However, this is where my issues with the story do start to crop up a little bit. The god's narrative takes about half of the page time in this story. I thought this was going to be focusing on Hamlet or Mawat and Iolo, their relationship, the politics that's going on in this world, you know, the Hamlet plotline, and that is only about 50% of the book, because the god does take over quite a bit. And this is kind of transitions to my next point, which is talking about the characters. I forgot how annoying Hamlet is as a character until I visited this story. I was immediately reminded to reading this play in class and just hating every second because Hamlet is such a sulky, angsty, and annoying character who just sits in his room and cries all the time. And then when he does take action, he doesn't actually think about the consequences of his actions. And unfortunately, that is exactly how Mawat behaves in this book. When he returns home and finds his uncle in his father's place on the throne, he locks himself into his room for days on end and won't let Aolo in to see him, won't let anybody in to see him. And Aolo is like, I'm gonna go and try to investigate and figure out what's going on and maybe help my friend, because Aolo is so loyal to Mawat, he is willing to do anything for him, which Mawat does not deserve, in my opinion. So Aolo is the one running around doing all of the investigative work. He's talking to all these political figures and politicking. He's talking to these religious figures, also politicking. He's the one driving the plot forward a little bit. And then he brings all of his hard work back to Mawat and says, Mawat, look, I found all these answers. And not only does Mawat not believe him, he attacks him and chokes him out and almost kills his friend Aolo because he doesn't like what Aolo discovered. So if you're not a fan of that type of character, I feel like you would find Mawat insufferable just like I did. I loved Aolo as a character. He was so loyal and so smart and politically savvy for never having to be in this type of situation before. And he was just done so dirty in this book by the other characters. Next, I'm going to be talking about the world building and the fantasy elements because this is a fantasy novel. So part of the magic fantasy world building of this story are the gods. The gods are manifested as beings, as objects, and they are real and active parts of the story. They dominate 50% of the narrative. So if you're a fan of having gods as characters and following along with them, this is really going to work for you. I can think of a couple examples off the top of my head. I know The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin has gods as characters. Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia, just to name two that are sitting right behind me, to be honest. The reason that I like those a little bit better than the way that it was executed in this book is because of, I think, mostly page time and the fact that the gods dominated so much of the narrative, and I find that I don't relate to them as characters when they take up that much space and time in the text, if that makes sense. They're always omniscient, they always kind of have very similar personality characteristics to them, and as a side character I could see that working, or as a love interest I do enjoy it in those instances, but in this particular story it just was too much for me, and we spent so long with the gods. I just wanted to get back to Aolo and his story. Consequently to this, it felt like Aolo wasn't really in control of his own narrative. It felt like the gods were dictating everything, and he was just a pawn, not only of Mawat, but of the gods as well. Another element of this fantasy world are like the priests and the priestesses who communicate with the gods, and then kind of what I was talking about in the summary about speaking to the gods and then reading the talismans that it's kind of like, you know, flip a coin. Yes is tails and no is heads, and you ask a god a question, you flip the coin, and the god supposedly will flip the coin to the correct answer. It's kind of how it works. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but there are individuals who can read these tokens, and hopefully that will express clarity to the situation that's going on. The gods kind of dominate these people's lives, and they also dominate this narrative. I don't want to give things away, but if you are familiar with the play, there are lots of political elements in here as well, mostly played by Aolo, not Mawat. Mawat kind of runs around being an idiot, while Aolo is the politically savvy one. If you enjoy Hamlet, if the Hamlet is one of your favorite plays, I would totally recommend this. I think there are a lot of interesting correlations between the two, not to give things away or spoil anything. But if you're not a big fan of Hamlet, I would maybe skip this one. I thought this was gonna be a win for me, and it really wasn't. Yeah, unfortunately this one just didn't work for me, and I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. Anyway, I gave this book 2 stars, so even though this book didn't work for me, I hope my review was able to give you a little bit more context, a little bit of information about what this book really is. So if you are interested in it, you can either pick it up with this knowledge in hand or skip this one. Totally up to you. I really appreciate you all for clicking on this video, and I will see you soon in another video very soon. Bye.